Hey folks, George here. This time we're going to discuss a different moral issue, and this is the moral problem of global poverty and global starvation and global suffering in this regard. Let me back up just for a second here. The word poverty has different meanings across different cultures. I am not going to talk about impoverished people in America. That's a different subject, and it's dealt with in a slightly different way. Well, or is it? We'll see here. However, the examples that we're going to talk about over the next 4 videos are dealing with global poverty, and that is ultimately people around the world who earn much less than $2 a day with purchasing power parity. People who are living off of less than $2 a day. Purchasing power parity. These are people who are really starving to death. We could talk about poverty in America, American-style poverty, but it's not the case that there are people in America, many people at least in America, who are starving to death on less than $2 a day purchasing power parity. So yeah, this is a slightly different discussion. I think that's an important discussion, but a different discussion. We're going to start this discussion with Garrett Hardin's article, Living on a Lifeboat. Garrett Hardin, I'm going to spoil it for y'all right now, gives us a very harsh reality about these sorts of things, and his response is going to sound very harsh to many people. First of all, well, yeah, to spoil it for y'all, he's ultimately saying that people around the world who are starving to death, we in rich countries should let them starve to death. And that is actually the morally good thing to do. We'll see before that certainly tugs at our emotional heartstrings. However, I want to analyze the reasons and argumentation that Garrett Hardin uses to reach this conclusion. We can still disagree with him. However, I want to disagree with his reasons and arguments as opposed to merely the emotional heartstring pulling that some of us might be more attuned to. So without much further ado, let's look at what Garrett Hardin does suggest. Garrett Hardin is ultimately responding to people who suggest that the Earth is a giant spaceship, right? And we are all living in this same spaceship called Earth. And in that spaceship called Earth, we should stop this wasteful cowboy economy and replace it with a more frugal spaceship economy. Garrett Hardin says this metaphor doesn't work for at least 3 reasons. Number 1, there is no captain of this spaceship called Earth. There's no one person in charge or a series of people in charge. The second reason that Hardin gives for saying that this spaceship Earth metaphor doesn't work is because there are demands upon common resources without acknowledging common responsibilities. So people are saying we need to feed starving people on the other side of the world, and Garrett Hardin is saying, but what are they giving me back? What responsibilities do they have instead of me just giving food? Again, I told you this would be a bit harsh. We'll see how he fleshes this out a bit more. Furthermore, regarding rights and responsibilities, Garrett Hardin is going to say when survival is at stake, responsibilities are actually a precondition to rights. They are not simultaneous. And this ultimately is going to be something we're going to explain later in the article, what Garrett Hardin calls the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons is ultimately where the common resources are going to be tragically lost because of this lack of mutual responsibility across many different people. Garrett Hardin, instead of talking about a spaceship Earth, is going to give us a different metaphor, and he's going to give us the metaphor of a lifeboat, right? Of course, each lifeboat in his metaphor is going to represent a country. So there's a lifeboat called the United States, there's a lifeboat called Canada, there's a lifeboat called the UK, the United Kingdom, and there are lifeboats for India and Bangladesh and Somalia and Haiti and all sorts of other lifeboats as well. The point about a lifeboat is each lifeboat has limited capacity. Or, since we're talking about countries, each country has a limited capacity. So, what is the obligation that rich lifeboats or flourishing lifeboats or flourishing countries, rich countries, what obligations do they have towards poorer countries? Well, he gives us three possible responses. The first is what he calls the Marxist response, such that everybody shall be taken upon and allowed onto this lifeboat called the United States lifeboat, right? What's going to happen if that's the case? Well, just like any other lifeboat, if you let everybody on, what happens to a lifeboat with a limited capacity? It will sink and everybody will die, right? And that's what happens if we follow this Marxist or Christian ideal, according to Hardin. Another alternative, what obligations countries shall have to other countries, is to let certain people onto this lifeboat up to maximum capacity. Up to maximum capacity. So let people into America and use the American resources up until the capacity is depleted. Here's Hardin's point. If you get up to maximum capacity, you have no safety cushion left, right? You have no safety cushion left. Here's the third alternative that Hardin suggests, and ultimately is going to be the suggestion that Hardin wants us to follow. Don't admit anybody onto this lifeboat called the United States. Why not? Because we need to preserve the safety cushion on this lifeboat called the United States. Now, Hardin realizes that this seems cruel. He reminds us, listen, if you think it's cruel and you feel guilty because you're lucky to be born in this country, well then go ahead and leave and give your space to somebody else. Jump off this lifeboat. That's Hardin's interesting response to that problem. Yes? Hardin is really going to focus much of his article on this problem of reproduction issues. Rich countries have fewer children than poor countries, which have too many children. What does that mean? That there's a key reason, according to Hardin. That's a key reason that so many of these countries are poor, because they have reproduction issues. They overpopulate. So poor countries around the world are overpopulated, according to Hardin. They can't meet the requirements of all their people. And so if you allow everybody onto the American lifeboat, what Hardin says will happen is a tragedy of the commons. Now, what does that ultimately mean? Let's back up for a quick second and talk about private property, right? According to Hardin, if I have private property, I take care of my property. I take care of it because it's mine. I take responsibility for it. Don't you do something similar? However, if there is common property open to all, people won't act responsibly. Of course, this is because people aren't nice. And a moralist might say, well, people need to act nicer. According to Hardin, that's the point. People aren't nice. And that's what leads to the tragedy of the commons. Even worse, to really illustrate this point, he says, all it takes is one bad apple to ruin the whole thing. For proof of this pessimistic idea of human attitudes, just look at the nature of pollution. Just look at pollution. Look at the diminishing fish stocks in the ocean. It's because the oceans are considered common property. So what do people do? They take as much as they possibly can. Right? They take as much as they possibly can. Look at pollution. People consider the air to be free. Right? Oh, the air belongs to everybody. So what does everybody do? They just blow as much smoke into the air and as much pollution into the air as possible. Right? Now, you'll forgive me, I live in New York City. It seems to me that Hardin is right here. You know, I wait in the subway platforms and I see how filthy these places are. I see trash litter everywhere in New York City. To really illustrate this point, when's the last time you've been in a New York City public bathroom, right? In a public park, for example. Yeah, I won't go into those places. Why? Because they're common property and nobody cares for them. And just like Hardin said, all it takes is one person to take advantage and ruin it for everybody. Now, Hardin attacks a certain solution to starvation around the world: world food banks. Hardin says these world food banks are for emergencies. But what is an emergency? By the way, let's look at different countries around the world. Well-run countries, mature leaders, competent and wise leaders around the world. They organize and they plan, and that's why they're ready when an emergency happens. There are countries around the world that are poorly run. They're run by immature people. They're run by unwise people, incompetent leaders. What's Hardin's point to all this? If that country is poorly run and we bail them out, we rich countries bail them out, Hardin says they won't be motivated to turn themselves around and become a well-run country. Because after all, if we reward, according to Hardin, helping them out in an emergency is a reward. If we reward their disorganization, why would they possibly change? Right? Here's another linguistic problem or philosophical problem Hardin has with all this. These aren't food banks. A bank, right? A bank is people all over depositing and people all over withdrawing and taking loans. But it's not a bank if only one group, rich countries, deposit and one group, poorly run countries, withdraw. That's not a bank at all. That's just rich countries giving to the poor. What this leads to, according to Hardin, is something called the ratchet effect. A lot of those countries that face emergencies like Hardin is describing are overpopulated anyway. They're already overloaded, those countries. So if we let people die, according to Hardin, they'll level out and those countries will be better off in the long run. Just letting people die. Okay, that sounds fairly harsh, but Hardin's giving his reasons and arguments here. Such countries, by the way, that are overpopulated are ruled by unwise and incompetent and even corrupt rulers. Supporting such leaders, Hardin is going to say, is a pejoristic system. That is, it's making the system, it's making matters, it's making the world, it's making that country worse by rewarding those incompetent, unwise, and corrupt leaders. Furthermore, now this is where Hardin's going to look at the mirror, I guess, of rich countries. Furthermore, when rich countries look in the mirror, Hardin is going to say, we shouldn't talk about rich countries as having a food surplus. Rather, they should call it a safety factor, similar to that lifeboat. Don't you need a safety cushion, so to speak? Now, you'll forgive me, I'm not so good with money, but everybody does tell me, by the way, I should always have more money than I need in my bank account instead of living paycheck to paycheck. Well, yeah, I guess if I were wiser and more competent, I could do that. But isn't that exactly what Hardin is saying? That wise countries do need safety for those rainy days, so to speak. If you really want to help these poor countries, according to Hardin, the real thing that we should do to help them is to promote economic development. That is the better solution. We need to teach countries to become rich countries and to manage themselves better. He recites an old Chinese proverb. Give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for the rest of his days. That's exactly what Hardin suggests we should do. Teach these countries how to be well run and organize their systems in a better way. In actually sending food as aid, emergency aid, Hardin is suggesting rich countries are actually doing more harm than good. Again, they're promoting the corruption, the unwise leadership, the incompetent leadership. To really wrap up this lifeboat metaphor for Hardin, Hardin is even against allowing mass immigration, right? Why? Again, because unrestricted immigration, according to Hardin, harms the local environment. He mentions Hawaii as an example. Look at Hawaii. The Hawaiian natives know that too many people in Hawaii are going to stress the resources in Hawaii. Hawaii cannot support so many people. Hardin says, as a matter of fact, the United States, the richest country on earth, cannot support so many people. And if it looks like the United States can support all these people right now, it's because the United States has been well organized and has created a nice safety net for itself, or a nice safety cushion for itself. Now, Hardin acknowledges, what about the old counter-argument that we are all immigrants? Hardin acknowledges, yeah, logically, that's absolutely right. Hardin acknowledges that. However, he does say, yeah, but maybe worse consequences are to come. And by the way, isn't there an infinite regress problem? Wasn't everybody an immigrant at some point, right? So you've heard these old arguments that Native Americans call the white man the immigrant. But 30, 40,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, there were no humans in what's called the United States today, right? They immigrated across, if I remember my human evolution classes and my human culture classes and my anthropology classes, they came across the Bering Land Bridge, right, during the Ice Age. So, indeed, there is an infinite regress problem. You have to stop somewhere and say, well, right now, this is the point where I don't want to allow any more immigration. So Hardin says. Now, Hardin, as heartless as he seems, he does say we should make exceptions for like refugees, and especially talented individuals too, to allow immigration for such people. Okay, I guess. That makes Hardin, I guess, a little bit nicer. I'm not sure. I wonder. I hope we understand Hardin's ideas and his reasons and his arguments for these ideas a little bit better. If you do disagree with him, what is wrong with his reasoning and his argumentation? Yeah. See you next time. Bye-bye.